Hello, and welcome to another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla, and I read a ton of books so that I can recommend the best to you. And today is a very exciting episode. We are continuing my top 15 books of 2023 countdown with books 10 through 6. I am so excited to talk to you guys about these books. I was just obsessed with them. And just like last week, if you missed that little spiel, then all of the books you're going to hear about today are 5-star reads. I, as of recording, have read 230 books in 2023, and these are the ones that have made it into the top 10. So this is a very big episode. But before we get into that, I just want to make a few announcements. You guys should know the drill by now. Please make sure you're following, subscribed, whatever it is you have to do on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. Check out my bookshop at bookshop.org/professionalbookgirl if you are inspired to buy any of the books from this episode. I'm on YouTube, and I think that's it. Follow me on Instagram too. So we're going to start off the show with what I'm obsessed with. Last week, the theme kind of went right into books, but we are switching it up this time. There are a few bookish things in this, but basically what I'm obsessed with this week is a TikTok trend. And it's this trend where people list like 5 to 10 things that have made their life better. Some people say life better, life easier. I kind of went with a mix of that. And I was going to film it for my TikTok, but I was like, do you know what? Let's just talk about it on the podcast because I have a lot to say about all of these things. So here are 10 things that have made my life better. And this is in no particular order. It's actually the order that I thought of them in. So maybe there's like a little like subconscious, like most importance in that. But these are just 10 things that have made my life better, easier. I'm always looking for things to improve my life. I'm very big into wellness. Unfortunately, I always fall for wellness trends, but there are things on this list that have like stuck and I think are great. So let's just get into that. First up is my Nespresso machine. And when I was making this list, I was getting fired up about this one because okay, here we go. When I started working at my last job, I was making like real money for the first time. And the first big thing that I bought myself was my Nespresso machine. It came very highly recommended to me from friends who have Nespressos. Basically, though, I always say I'm not a coffee snob, but I think my Nespresso is making me a coffee snob. I didn't drink any coffee until college. I didn't grow up in a household with coffee. My mom drinks tea, and my dad started drinking coffee after he like moved out of the house I grew up in. So there was no coffee in the house. And like when I started drinking it, I bought the family Keurig. So I didn't know what I was doing when it came to coffee. I would buy these like super sugary drinks at Starbucks, and then I finally bought a Keurig, and that is what I had forever. And I know like the coffee isn't great, and I understand why people would shit on the Keurig coffee because when I go home to my mom's and I have to drink from the Keurig, it's like sad because the Nespresso quality is just so much better. And look, I know it's expensive, and that's why I get fired up because basically I am so freaking sick and tired of men, specifically it is always a man, mansplaining coffee to me and telling me that I shouldn't be using my overpriced Nespresso. And I could not give less of a shit about their opinion on my coffee drinking. What I always say is I do not drink alcohol and I do not do drugs. Let me have my fucking expensive and fancy coffee that literally I go to sleep thinking about the coffee I'm going to drink in the morning and looking forward to it. It is what gets me out of bed. It tastes so, so good. They have all the flavored ones. Right now I'm drinking the peppermint and the gingerbread, and I am loving those too. I use nut pods, which are sugar-free, like dairy-free creamers that have so much flavor in them. It's insane that they don't have sugar in them. And I put that in it. And it's just like, I look so forward to it every day. People will ask me for like coffee shop recommendations in New York City on my Instagram a lot. And I never have one because I make my coffee at home because of my Nespresso. So everyone can fuck off and leave me and my Nespresso happily in peace where we are. And it's just made my life so much better. Next up is a free thing, and it is the Notes app on my phone. I've always used it, but in the last year, specifically the last like 6 months, I've started using it in a different way. So I've always used it. I keep a grocery list on my Notes app, and recently I have pinned lists. So my grocery list is pinned, and there's different categories for what I buy at Target, what I buy at Trader Joe's, and then I usually do a monthly Amazon order where I restock like cleaning supplies and things like that. So I have 3 categories on there, and the second I run out of something or finish something, I add it onto that list. I have extreme OCD about running out of things. It's like it causes me a lot of anxiety. So the second something is running low, it goes onto that Notes app, and then when I'm at the food store, I don't have to think about what I have to buy. It's on there. I keep a list of my TBR on there. So if you are watching this, you see there's my monthly TBR there, and I have all of those titles listed out in a Notes app. And when I finish a book, I just delete it from the list. And it's kind of never ending. And it's an easy way for me if I'm like out and about and I quickly want to remember a book that I'm going to read soon, I know that it's on there. I'm going to talk about monthly TBRs are on this list, so I'll get more into specifics of that in a minute or so. But I also, if I'm randomly like, oh wait, I want to read this book soon, I'll just like write it on the end of that notes app, and it just kind of helps keep it fresh in my mind. And then I started doing this over the summer, but I am a to-do list person. I always say like routine and organization makes me feel safe because I grew up in a very chaotic life and like I need order and I need things organized. And I started keeping this to-do list on my notes app on my laptop with work with a daily to-do list. And I would plan it out a week and ahead, and it was an easy way for me to kind of break tasks up. And I would do that with my personal life on a paper to-do list. But then if you may remember, if you follow me on Instagram, when I left my job, I entered my reputation era and I literally went home and lived with my mom for 6 weeks and kind of just ran away from my entire life. And I didn't bring that to-do list with me. So I started keeping them in my phone in the way that I did on my work computer. So I'll just say the date and then the day of the week under it. And then there are things that go on every single one. And those are like my daily non-negotiables. So it's like K-read what post, check emails. I always put a workout on there, whether I get to it or not. It just like motivates me to do it because I want to cross it off the to-do list. And then I also plan out my daily meals on there, which I have a lot of anxiety about food. I'm also going to be talking about it later in the list, but it also helps me with grocery shopping. So I will like tomorrow, I will probably map out all of my meals for next week. I know what days I'm going to be out to dinner. And then I will look at the meals I mapped out for the week and make my grocery list from there in the grocery list app. And it just, in the grocery list note, it just helps me kind of stay organized and on top of things. And it's nice having a to-do list on your phone rather than paper because it's easier to move things around. And I have it with me anywhere. So there's been so many times where someone will be like, oh, you should do this or you should check this out. And I'll just quickly add it onto the to-do list and I have it set up for the week. So I could just assign it to any day. So I love my notes app. I know that's also a trend where it's like, what are your most chaotic notes? Like that. I also have chaotic notes, but like those are the notes I use every single day. I plan out all of my Carrot What content in a notes app a month ahead, which that is the social media manager in me that it's planned out a month ahead, but I've always kept track of my posting calendar for there in my notes app. I just love it. Next up is I have three things in this, but I guess they could all be categorized as anxiety management. So common and hot is Lexapro. I started taking Lexapro in June of this year, and wow, I can't believe I lived 28 years without it because I was about to turn 29 when I started taking it. I have always had anxiety and I didn't always know it was anxiety. And I remember in college, I started opening up to my new friends about the way I like would go through life. And they were like, what? And then I realized like, oh, not everybody's brain is as insane and torturous and chaotic as mine. And I realized I had anxiety. And I always have thought like maybe one day I would end up on something like Lexapro. Lexapro specifically because I know like family members were on it. So it was just like the one that was always in my head. And in the beginning of this year, in the beginning of 2023, I really started thinking about it more, just thinking like, I know I'm good at managing my anxiety. I have this toolbox from therapy and from other things, which I will get into in a second, but I just like needed something to take the edge off almost. Like I don't drink alcohol and I know that like alcohol and anxiety do not mix. And that is a huge reason why I stopped drinking alcohol because it was destroying my mental health and just making my anxiety a million times worse. And it was just like my brain was not a great place to be. But there is something to be said for like just having something to kind of take the edge off of how you're feeling, whether it's just like an instant gratification and then whatever the alcoholic will make it worse in the long run. And so I was just thinking about it a lot. And then in June of this year, I was severely depressed, the most depressed I have ever been. And I was like, do you know what? Maybe this is the time for me to do it. And it absolutely changed my life. I'm not saying everybody needs to be on something, but I'm sharing this to say if you've been thinking about it or then this is like your sign to maybe give it a try because my brain is just quieter. Like I noticed, the first thing I noticed was that I didn't have to think before speaking. I used to be like so in my head about things and I thought it was completely normal. And like, it's just like calm down inside my head. And I noticed I would be like singing while I was like walking around the house. I was like, I can't remember the last time that I did that. It's just my brain fog cleared. Like it has just made life so much easier. And I went on it. And then like a month and a half later, I went through this insane, tumultuous week at work, which led to me exiting my job. And I, the whole time was like, thank God I am on the Lexapro because when I go through periods of extreme anxiety and unrest like that, I get so sick with my anxiety that I literally cannot eat. And it is just like, it is not healthy and it is so horrible. And I absolutely hate it. And that didn't happen this time because I had my Lexapro. On top of that, though, some non prescriptive things. Magnesium and chamomile tea have been such a big game changer for me. I'm on a very low dose of the Lexapro and I love it because I still feel things. And I've had this conversation with friends like, I don't want to be numb. I just want life to be easier. And I still feel anxiety, thankfully, not the way that I did. And like the day to day anxiety is kind of gone, but obviously we end up in anxious situations. And in that case, I will take magnesium and drink chamomile tea. And that like, it does help with like taking the edge off a bit. And it just like, it calms me down and it's so great. Like finding little tools and things like that to help with your anxiety have been such a huge game changer for me. Next up is history books on audio. Okay, I was going to say I feel like a bit of a hypocrite, but I don't feel like a hypocrite. I've evolved. That is the correct term for it. I'm not an audiobook girl, and I still stand by that. I cannot do fiction on audio. I commend all of you who do it. My brain wanders too much. I have a hard time following along with characters. I'm just not into it. It's not my thing. Like, kudos to everybody who it is. It's not for me. But I've always been able to do nonfiction on audio, and I would do celebrity memoirs while I was sitting at my desk. And a few months ago, I started doing this. This was when I was still working. I think I was reading this or I was listening to it in not April, because that's when I was in London. In like May, I did Say Nothing, which is about the IRA and the troubles in Ireland. And I loved that on audio because the guy had the accent and it was just like, I just really enjoyed it. And I realized that if I was reading that on paper, probably would have taken me a longer time to get through. And like, that is why I don't really read nonfiction, because it starts to feel like homework. But I really love history. Like, you guys know that if you've followed me for a while, I love history and learning about history. But I would like, and I do it mostly through historical fiction, which will always be my favorite medium, but there's something to be said about like a history book. And I've just found that doing history books on audio it's like listening to a podcast. And I love history podcasts. My favorite one is the History Chicks. I've been listening to them for a very long time. So I've listened to most of their backlog and they don't release that often. So, and I haven't found one that like measured up to it. And the history books on audio is kind of a way to get that. So I recently did Aster by Anderson Cooper, and right now I'm doing the Romanov sisters, which is my favorite one so far. The way that it's written is so entertaining, and like I really do feel like I'm listening to a very long, it's like the book is 11 hours podcast about the Romanovs, and I'm learning so much, and it's in such a digestible, entertaining way, which is important. But I know that if I were just sitting down and reading this every night, my mind would be wandering and I would get bored. But there's something to be said about listening to it. I'll listen to it while I go on walks, while I'm cooking. Like, I'm listening to like an hour a day. I'm so into it. Like, I'm obsessed with it. And I just like thinking about it as a podcast. So I'm going to, in 2024, once a month, I'm going to do a history book on audio. So I always have I do one nonfiction a month. I've been doing that for like 4 years now. I'm still going to do that. And that'll probably be like a celebrity memoir or something like fun on a paper book. And then I'm also going to do a history book in audio, and I'll spend the whole month listening to it. I feel like I'm learning, I feel engaged, and it's like a nice, fun way to like lean into the parts of history that I'm interested in that like we didn't really learn about in school, aka women. So yeah, I'm loving that. Next up is exercise, but specifically Melissa Wood Health Pilates and going on walks. I have spent my whole life being tortured by physical activity. I am not athletic, and I'm from a very athletic, sports-oriented family, and I always felt pressured to be playing a sport. And I did cheerleading, and I absolutely hated it. And like, it was just this like pressure to like, my family in my town is like known in like the local sports community, and I am the black sheep in that sense. I am like the only one who is not athletic, who does not enjoy sports. I hate exercising, but I also have always had like really bad body image issues, and was like forcing myself to exercise in like these torturous ways. And when I discovered walking, which sounds so stupid, but like that really changed it for me. And this was in high school, and I did it in an extreme way, which was not healthy. I would literally, which walking on an incline, I think is a great workout. And like, I really enjoy that, but I would go to the gym and do it for like an hour to 2 hours, which was just like really not okay. But now I'll just go for long walks around my neighborhood. And like, I always did that to an extent, but in on my UK trip, which here we are again, every single episode of the show, I've talked about my UK trip. Can you tell it was like a very formative, best experience in my entire life? But I lost so much weight when I was in London because I was walking everywhere. And when I got back, I was like, that was exercise. And like, I felt so good and I felt very strong and fit. And I've just tried to really implement that back into my routine here. And then for the last 3 years, I've been doing Melissa Wood Health Pilates, which like sometimes there's a bit of a yoga blend, but it is at home. I pay for the subscription like through Apple. It's an app, and she released this weekly schedule. There's 3 tiers of it. There's beginner, intermediate, challenging. I kind of go back and forth between all three depending on what workout I want to do that day. Most of them are around 20 minutes, and this is why I love it, because I like get bored when I'm working out, or the time will seem so intimidating to me. Like an hour-long class, like no, like I'm out. But 20 minutes, I can do that. That is so manageable. It's like 5 songs. And I feel so good. Like Melissa specifically has just changed the way that I view my body image, exercise. Like she will say like, how bad do you want to feel good? And that is what I say to myself to get myself on the mat. I kind of like, I've gone through phases over the 3 years where I'm like doing it every day for like a year on end, and then I take a few months off. I took a few months off like September, October this year, and now I'm back into it, and I just feel so great. And it's just so quick and easy, and like it's all really low impact movement. It looks like you're not doing anything, but like you feel it. And like I've noticed like muscle tone in my body for the first time in my entire life. So, and like recently I went to a Pure Barre class, and I shared this on my Instagram story, and I had to leave because I literally almost fainted. And I always knew like classes weren't for me. That type of workout probably wasn't for me. I didn't drink water before I went. It was like a 1 p.m. class, and I only had coffee, and it was very scary. I started seeing black, which has never happened before. And I was like, I'm going to pass out, and I'm in a room of strangers. And then I was like, maybe I'll go back. Maybe I'll go back. But I was like, no, like it, 29 years on this earth, I finally found the workout for me, the Pilates and going on long walks. Why am I trying to switch it up just to be like trendy, or because everyone's telling me I should try like a certain class or whatever? I know what works for me. I know what I like, and I'm sticking with it. And they have made my life better. Okay, the next two are bookish. The first one being strict TBRs. I follow a very strict monthly TBR, but there is wiggle room. So usually when I post on K Read What at the beginning of a month, like my December TBR, I plan on reading those books in that order. But here's a perfect example of how that doesn't happen. So I set that TBR in that order, and I'm very intentional about picking my TBR. I make sure there's one nonfiction in it. I did 23 books in 2023, so I make sure there's 2 books of that in the TBR. I like to have a mix up of genre. Obviously, it's December, so there's some theme books there. But then I set them in like a random order. Like on the day I'm setting the TBR, I make the order up. Obviously, the order can change, but it makes me feel accomplished when I like get through it in the order that I did. And it makes me read quicker, I think. Probably not, but it just makes me feel like I am. But so I had the December TBR, right? And Never by Jessa Hastings came out, which Jessa Hastings is the author of the Magnolia Parks books, and Never is her new series, which is a Peter Pan retelling, one of my most anticipated books of 2023. Picked it up at Barnes & Noble, and it went right to the top of the TBR stack. Like having a set, strict monthly TBR for me, because I love order and structure, helps me. And like I get so overwhelmed with the amount of unread books in my apartment. By nature of what I do, the amount of books coming out, I get stressed thinking like, I want this book is coming out. I want to read it so I can talk about it if I like it. So that way, because I know you guys are going to want to know what I think about it. It's like, honestly, it's like, I love doing this, and I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't. But there are like little stupid pressures like that come with it. So having the TBR makes me feel better in that sense. But I would never not do a mood read, or never not put a new book right at the TBR. But setting it makes it feel more manageable. The amount of unread books in my apartment, the amount of books that I want to read and get to. And it has just helped keep me on track and keep me organized. I've been doing it for a few years now, and it does, like, some books will be on that set TBR stack, which like I keep in a separate part of my room for months. But then when I finally get to it just feels good, you know? And the next one is a book of the month subscription, but specifically a yearly subscription. So for the last 3 years for Christmas, I've gotten a yearly book of the month subscription from my parents. And this means that the way the yearly subscription works is that like your pick of that month would be free. It's part of the gift card. If you don't know what book of the month is, it's this bookish subscription box where they release, it used to be 5 picks. Now sometimes there will be more, but it'll be like, I'm just going to use 5 as the example. It'll be like, here are the 5 book of the month, and you can choose one as your book of the month. And then now you can add up to 5 add-ons, and the books are cheaper. They're hardcover books. The add-ons are $10. The first one is like 15. But the way I did it, I'm like a little bit of a scammer. And so because I bought that yearly subscription on my parents' card, because also I buy myself all of my Christmas gifts from my parents. So that way I'm getting things that I know I want and will use, and things that I need, and things that I've wanted all year and have been waiting for. I'm assuming this is going to end one day. I'm almost 30 years old, but we're just rolling with it while it's happening. All of my book of the month is free then, because specifically my dad's card is on my account. And obviously we have had a conversation about it, and he was like, it's books, like, and it's like a very minimal expense. Like, I'm happy to like provide that for you. And it's like kind of goes into the yearly Christmas gift, the like additional charge each month. It's usually like $20. And it's just like a nice way to feel like I'm getting free books every month, because I am. And if I'm in a phase where I'm like, oh, these books are coming out, but I'm trying not to spend as much money, which like my life right now, I don't have a full-time job. It's nice knowing that I always have that to lean on. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like, ask for it for Christmas, gift it to someone for Christmas. Who doesn't want free books? The final thing is leaning into things that I love / making them my entire personality. I have such, like, I'm going to go off about this one again. I hate, I don't know how to phrase this, but so something I say a lot is, as a former teenage girl, I am always tentative to talk about things that I love. And it is so fucked up, and it makes me so angry. And I don't know if getting over that is because I'm getting older, or I've just become so much more comfortable with myself and confident in myself that like I don't give a fuck what anybody thinks. But what is wrong with embracing the things that you love / making them your personality? Like, I hate when someone be like, you make reading books your entire personality, or you make loving Taylor Swift your entire personality. Like, yeah, obviously, because those are two of my favorite things. And like, fuck you if you like, if you're gonna like shit on me for that. Like, I absolutely hate it. And growing up as a teenage girl, I would die if something I love came up in conversation, if it was like the Jonas Brothers or One Direction, because I would just be made fun of for the things that I loved. And I think that is so stupid, and the people that do that can literally fuck off. Like, it is so rude. We should be embracing people embracing things that they love. And since I got more comfortable with that and kind of being like, I unapologetically loving the things that I love, I also don't believe in guilty pleasures. Like, why should you feel guilty about the things that you love? Last night I sat and watched 2.5 hours of Bravo. Like, no, I don't feel bad about that. It made me happy. Like, who cares what other people think? And I know it's hard, because I used to care. It takes a while to get there. But leaning into things that you love, it just makes life so much better, and it makes you happier. And like, you have hobbies. Like, when all of a sudden I was unemployed, there was this moment where I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do all day? I have so freaking much to do all day. If you've been watching my Vlogmas vlogs, like, I have my books, and I have this, and I have my shows, and like going on walks and exploring, and these things that I enjoy doing outside of work, and like really leaning into that and kind of making it part of my identity has been so liberating. And I feel I'm 29 years old, and I feel the most myself I have ever felt in my entire life. Like, I love history, and I love girly things, and like leaning into whimsy, and I love Disney and Taylor Swift and reading, obviously. Here we are. And I freaking love Bravo. And I don't care if anyone's going to shit on me for watching that much reality TV. What is wrong with embracing that and being excited about the things that I love? I would never make somebody feel bad for something that they love. When I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about on this episode, I kept coming back to this one specific example from this year. In February, my sister and I went to Disney in Florida. We also went to Disney in California this year too, but we grew up going to Disney every single year. It is my family's place. After that trip, I said, like, I don't live in the house I grew up in anymore. I can't go back into that house, but I can go to Disney and see my family's memories on every single inch of that park. And when I was telling people at work I was going to Disney, I was so excited, and they were like shitting on me for that. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like I could, like, it could be drugs, like I could be going on a bender somewhere, but I'm going to Disney with my sister. I had so much fun. And then on that trip in Hollywood Studios in Disney, they have made this Star Wars world. I have never seen any Star Wars. It's on my list, I know, because I feel like I would really like it, but I've just never gotten into it. It was not a thing in my household growing up. And it is like you are in the movies when you're there. And I, walking around, just kept saying, like, oh my God, like, I wish I was into this because it has to be the coolest thing in the world if you're into it. And then we were going on this one ride. I think it was the one where the like Millennium Falcon ride, I think. And you have to like, it's virtual reality type thing. And two people are like driving it, and then two people are shooting, and two people do something else. And my sister and I go on. So it's like six people in a ship. And we were with, it was like three groups of two. And my sister and I were first online. So we end up being the drivers. And we were waiting to go into the spaceship, and we were chatting with the people online. And we were like, yeah, we don't know anything about Star Wars. Like, we don't know what any of this means. What are we doing? Whatever. And of course, we ended up with like the most important positions. We were driving the friggin' thing, and I was so bad at it. And like the screens like made me so nauseous. So I was like, I'm gonna friggin' throw up all over this Millennium Falcon. But the other four people in our group, they were in Star Wars outfits, and some of them had Star Wars tattoos, and they were so excited to be there, and they couldn't believe we didn't know anything about it, but they were explaining it to us, and like made me want to get into that. And it's just they were just so unapologetically happy to be loving something that they love. And I felt envious of that. And I could have sat there and been like a typical like bitch and be like, oh my God, like these nerdy people, whatever. But I was like, no, this is so cool how excited they are to be here. And yeah, like that I could talk about this forever, really, but leaning into the things that you love and making them more a part of you, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And like, fuck off to everybody who makes you feel bad about that. Now that we're at the half-hour mark of me ranting, I guess it's time to talk about books. All right, coming in hot, book number 10 of 2023. I can't believe we're in the top 10. This is crazy. Number 10 is Eligible by Curtis Sittenfeld. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling, and I am finally in my Pride and Prejudice era. I kind of slowly, over the course of this year, started dipping my feet into it. Some of you may remember, if you've been following Care and What for a few years, I read Pride and Prejudice in like 2021. And I was like, I don't like reading the classics. It's intimidating to me. It slows down my reading pace, and it makes me feel bad about myself, which is so stupid, but it's the way my brain is wired. And I just like don't enjoy reading them. But I read three Jane Austen books. I read Emma, Pride and Prejudice, and Sense and Sensibility. Emma and Pride and Prejudice were definitely my favorite ones. But I was like, who is Mr. Darcy? Like, I just felt so left out. I wanted to know what everyone was talking about. Like, I'm a Lizzie, I'm a Jane, whatever. So I read Pride and Prejudice, and then I watched the 2005 movie, and that slowly became one of my favorite movies. And then in the beginning of 2023, I don't know why I said the year like that, I started watching the movie a bit more when I was on my UK trip. I went to Bath, where there's obviously so much Jane Austen there. And even just being in England, it just felt very Jane Austen. And on the flight home, I watched the movie, and it just slowly has been like become a thing. Like, I watched the movie kind of a lot. It's become a comfort movie. I've bought like Pride and Prejudice artwork to hang on my bedroom wall, bookmarks, whatever. It took me forever, but I'm here. I'm in my Pride and Prejudice era. I know who Mr. Darcy is. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. This is the first retelling I've read, and I've heard it's the best one. So there's nowhere to go but down from here. And honestly, at this point, I love this one so much. I don't know if I would even want to read another retelling. So in this book, we meet the Bennets, and the main character is obviously Lizzie Bennet, and she's actually in her 40s, which I thought was interesting. I'm assuming in like the movie and the original book, she was a bit younger, or she's almost 40, and Jane is 40. And Jane and Lizzie live in New York. They grew up in Ohio in kind of this very big Tudor house, kind of like falling down around them. That the house becomes a big plot point throughout the book. But they both moved to New York. The other three sisters stayed and still live at home with their parents. And their dad had a massive heart attack. So we meet them when they're back in Ohio. They went to obviously make sure their dad was okay, and then they end up kind of managing the house and managing the family. And their mom is just like the mom in the movie and in the book, and she is like cannot believe that Lizzie and Jane are as old as they are, and they're single and they don't have kids, and she just wants to like match them with somebody. So they find out that there is a little like small town celebrity moving to their town. His name is Chip Bingley, and he was on a reality dating show called Eligible, which is basically like The Bachelor in this world. And he's also a doctor, and like there's absolutely nothing medical about this book, but I was just like, so Grey's Anatomy. Like these hotshot doctors come to this town that they hate, which that becomes a thing, for the hospital there. So Bingley and Fitzwilliam Darcy come to this town in Ohio because they're doctors at this hospital, and they are at this gathering where the Bennets are, and they meet, and Jane and Chip kind of really hit it off right away, and Lizzie overhears Darcy talking shit about the town and about the Bennets and whatever, and like I'm assuming all of us know what happens. This book stands alone so strongly, and that part, because when I was thinking of how I was going to talk about this book, I was like, most people listening probably know the plot of Pride and Prejudice, but it's so different still. So like a lot of the book is like Lizzie grappling with taking over and like kind of the disorganization of her family and the chaos of her younger sisters, which yeah, like is in the main one, but like different, and grappling with herself. Like she was in kind of a shitty relationship before that, like lingers through the book a bit, figuring out what she wants from life. Like her life really changes throughout the course of this book, regardless of her relationship with Darcy. So does Jane's. Like Jane is on, when we meet her, she's on this journey to become a single mother, which I thought was so cool and modern and such an interesting take for this book. All of the sisters, really, it's like you take their plot point from the original Pride and Prejudice and kind of modernize it, and in such a clever way. But like I would forget I was reading a Pride and Prejudice retelling, and then there would be something like so subtle and clever that was a callback to the original one, and I would literally start laughing. Like the house number of Pemberley is 1812 or something, which whatever it is the year that Pride and Prejudice was originally published, and I was like just so well done and clever. And then when it would come back to you, you'd be like, oh right, yeah, like I actually do know what's supposed to happen here. But the modern twists were just so much fun. The story was so much fun. The characters were so well fleshed out. Like I I loved this so much. I didn't want it to end. I read this when I was home over Thanksgiving, and I would have like 50 pages left, and then I'd go on my phone for like 10 minutes because I just like didn't want to get to the end of it. I just didn't want it to be over. Like I can't recommend this enough. If you're not really a Pride and Prejudice girl, if you've never read it, I think you can, I know you can pick this up and still enjoy it because it stands so strongly on its own, which I think is a real testament to the writing and the storytelling. The fact that this is a retelling of a book most people in the world know the plot of, know these characters, but to be able to make them so modern and different, but they still call back to that original character in a way that they are recognizable to you and they feel so familiar and you feel like you know them, even despite all of these differences you're learning along the way. Just so good. So good. This is my fourth book by Sittenfeld. It is by far my favorite. I have also read Rodham, Romantic Comedy, and American Wife, and I just bought Prep, so I will be reading that one next. It is my favorite for so many reasons. One of them being that this one has short chapters. If all of the Sittenfeld books I've read, they don't really have chapters. It's like parts, and they're so long, and it drives me fucking insane because I'm like, I can't stop. I don't like to stop reading in the middle of a chapter, and like yeah, there's this weird psychology that short chapters makes you read faster, but it is real. Like I swear by it. And like when they are just so long like that, it drives me insane. No matter how much I love the book, it makes me annoyed as I'm reading it. So this one had short chapters, and I was like so happy when I realized that. I love this so much. I gave this 5 stars, of course. That is Eligible by Curtis Sittenfeld. All right, we've got another romance coming in at number 9. Nora Goes Off Script by Annabel Monaghan. Oh my God. So I was like an idiot when it came to this book. The publisher sent it to me when it came, honestly, before it came out. I had an arc of it, and then they sent me a finished copy, and I never picked them up. I was like, I'm never going to read that. I totally judged it by its cartoonish cover and was like, not for me. I donated copies. I gifted one away to a Bookstagram friend. And I had an extra arc that I gave to my mom because my mom will like only read, she calls them rom-coms. So like she'll only read romance, and all my book mail gets sent to her house because I just don't trust the mail in my New York City walk up. So sometimes she'll like, she always sends me a picture when I get book mail, and sometimes she'll be like, I want to read this one. And I had 3 copies of this. So I was like, you can keep it. And then one day over the summer, something in me was just like, I want to read Nora Goes Off script. So thankfully, my mom still had a copy. This is before I entered my reputation era and went home for 6 weeks. So I was still commuting back and forth to go home on the weekend so I could go to the beach. And I could not wait to get home on the weekend and pick it up. I loved this book so much. Part of me is like, I can't believe I passed over it. But whenever that happens and I end up loving a book so much, I feel like it's just the universe saying, I needed to be reading this book at this specific time for me to love it in this way. Because I do think it is a real thing that like the timing of when you read a book plays a role into what you rate it. If I had read it when it first came out, I might not have given it 5 stars. It might not have hit me in that specific way. And that's also part of why rating is so subjective. And like, yeah, if I say a book is 5 stars, I think it's worth picking up, but like everyone has different opinions and emotions and perspective and like circumstances going into reading a book. But anyway, back to this book. So our main girl is Nora, and she is a screenwriter. She's a single mother, and she lives in this house, obviously. But I pictured it as like this old, beautiful Victorian that is kind of like crumbling around her a little bit. And I pictured it on like a lot of land. And she lives in this small town that I imagine as like a Hallmark-esque, like everyone, which you know from reading it, but like everyone knows each other, wants to help each other out. She is like really well liked in the town. She seems like a great girl. And like I said, she's a single mother. She has a young son and a daughter, and her ex-husband was just like a piece of shit. He decided to leave one day. He's very inconsistent with coming back to see the kids, which is just like really sad to read about. And she usually writes Hallmark type movies, but she needed an outlet for what she went through with her divorce and her ex. And she wrote this like beautifully devastating movie. And when she sent it to her agent was like, this is different. And so she sends it off to a different production company, and it ends up getting picked up, and it's kind of like the hot movie coming out. So they're filming at the house, like specifically this tea room in her backyard that she uses as her writing room. Like that's a big, I think the movie would actually have been called The Tea Room or something. But like that's a big like part of the story is the tea room. So the book opens and the movie crew and everyone is coming to film at her house. It's supposed to be only a couple of days. And they load this like trailer onto her front lawn because the movie star, Leo, is going to be staying there rather than like going back and forth to the city. I think they're like, they might be upstate New York or something because it's specifically New York City that they talk about. He just like wants to like stay on set, which she's like, okay, that's kind of weird because he's an A-list movie star. He had been Sexiest Man Alive in People magazine. Like he is famous, but like a little bit past his prime, which listen, we say that about women in Hollywood. We're going to say it about men in Hollywood. So he's like staying in the trailer on her front lawn, which is like so weird to her, like this famous movie star. They kind of hit it off when they're filming the movie, and when they're done, he is like, look, I want to stay. Like I think there was something going on in his life that he was like running away from, and he didn't want to go back to his real life. So he stays for, I think it starts out as a week. And he like, I'm pretty sure it was like he gave her money and she needs the money because she needs to do repairs on the house. So over the course of that week, he just becomes completely immersed in her life. He goes with her to like grocery shop, and he helps take care of the kids and cook dinner. And like he's a really positive male role model in her kids' lives. And like obviously they're going to fall in love. And it's kind of like they're in this like perfect little bubble for the course of this week or so. And I thought it was really interesting take on someone running away from Hollywood, which like we see sometimes in these celebrity romance books, but it was done in a bit of a different way. Like in those chapters, it was like everything was perfect, and it's like the Hallmark type like rom-com, whatever. But obviously, real life comes knocking. And it came down like really hard. And when I was writing my notes out for this, which I don't write specific notes, I just write bullet points to jog my memory. I thought back to the movie Priscilla, which I just saw last weekend. And there's a scene, and like, this isn't a spoiler, it was history, but Elvis and Priscilla Presley met in Germany when Elvis was in the army and Priscilla was 14. That's a different conversation though. And they have like this little whirlwind romance while he's in Germany, like over the course of a year or so. And then he like comes back to the States and she is so devastated for him to leave. But she keeps saying, like, I'm worried you're going to forget about me, meaning like you're going to go back and you're in Hollywood and you're the number one like hot guy in America and every girl's like throwing themselves at you and you're in the Hollywood machine and like PR relationships and you're around these actresses and etc. And it really reminded me of what happened in Nora Goes Off Script, because Leo had a taste of real life and normalcy when he was with Nora. And Nora, that is her life though. She's not from that Hollywood life. And they became like a little unit and he got very close with her kids. And like that, I'm sure is like very hard. Um, and he leaves and there's a bit of distance at first, but I'm not going to spoil anything, but like it is a romance. So there's always like the third act breakup and then whatever, they get back together. The reveal, there was this reveal that had me crying. I loved this so much. It's really short. I'm pretty sure it's under 300 pages. You can fly right through it. I could not put it down. And like the main love story here, I love Nora and Leo, but like this book is really about Nora finding herself and finding her path outside of a man. She just so happens to find a man who is able to support her in that, which I thought was really important. Reading about her as a single mother, reading about her on this new career path, like forging her own way. Her, like I said, her ex was a piece of shit, like getting out from under his control. Just so, so good. I absolutely love this. Of course, I gave it 5 stars because it is my number 9th favorite book of the year. That is Nora Goes Off Script by Annabel Monaghan. And I also did really like her book. It's called like Next Summer or something like that. I really like that one too. Okay, coming in at number 8 is Black Sheep by Rachel Harrison. Now, the official genre of this book is a horror, but it's not like scary. It's more, I don't know how to say this without like spoiling the main thing, but like it's like spooky, I guess. Like it's not, I don't know. I always say I'm not a horror girl, and then I'll read a horror like this, or I read The September House a few months ago and loved both of them. I'm like, oh, maybe I am a horror girl. It's just like, it's not like a slasher horror. I don't know. When I picture horror, I picture like stupid horror movies with like jump scares and shit and all that stuff that I hate. But like, this is not that. There is so much I can't say about this book because I do not want to spoil any of it. My goal here is to give you enough of a tease to go pick this up because I want you to have the reactions that I had. So much of this needs to be a surprise in your reading experience. And that is one of the hardest things about what I do, not giving away like the parts that really excited me. But I hope I can convince you to pick this up with just a little bit that I'm going to say. So our main girl is Vesper, and she grew up in a religious cult in rural Pennsylvania. And I mean, I'm just sold right on that. And so they lived, I imagine, kind of like a compound. Like in my head, I pictured this giant field with just like houses scattered around it. And like, I don't know if they had their own town and like they had their own school, but she lived in like a very, I also pictured this one as a Victorian mansion, but like a gothic Victorian mansion because her mom is a famous actress and she's famous for being a final girl in horror movies. So her family is very high up in this religious cult because of who her mom is. They have never been close. Her mom kind of couldn't care less about her. And she was raised by her aunt, who is like the exact opposite of her mom. She's very warm and generous and caring. And she was really close with her cousin, who was her same age growing up, but she left the cult when she was 18. And we meet her, I think it's like 6 years later. She's working this really shitty job in a diner. Like it just seems like a horrible circumstance, but she's on her own and she's like forging her own path in the world. And to her, like that is enough. And like in this opening scene in the diner, like someone's like, oh, you look like whatever the mom's name is. And she's like, pretend she doesn't know her. But like, that's just like how famous her mom is in this like specific kind of like cult classic movies. So she gets home from work one night and there's a red envelope on her doorstep and she opens it and it is a wedding invitation for her cousin that she was extremely close with growing up. And the cousin is marrying her first love. And obviously at first she's like, it's so weird, but she loves both of them. And she's like, I couldn't be with him, so I'm glad they could be together. And there's something in her that she wants to go back, and she does end up going back, but well, she's out on her own. She's kind of looking for her dad. She met him a few times growing up, but like he was not a like consistent figure in her life. She wasn't close with her mom, like I said. Like, she really wants nothing to do with where she came from, but it always has this kind of hold over her. So she's given the invitation to go back, and she goes. And she shows up at the house for the wedding celebration, and everyone is like, oh my God, you're here. Like, everyone is so surprised to see her there. And it all kicks off from that. I really can't say anything else. But when you learn more about the cult, I was cracking up. Like, it is so clever. It is so good. She ends up being pulled back into her family and the cult's bullshit. Goes through some trials and tribulations, and I just want to say it. It is on the tip of my tongue, but I don't want to give it away because it is so good. I could not stop thinking about this book. Like, I started it one night and I literally had dreams about it that night. I couldn't wait to finish it. It is twisty. It is fun. It's like, it is a perfect October book, but don't wait until next October because it is just so good. It's a really quick read. It's under 300 pages. Just cannot recommend it enough. I was sent a Kindle copy from the publisher and I loved it so much that I bought a physical copy so I can have it on my shelf. Just can't recommend this enough. This was my favorite Halloween themed read that I did this year. And it's not Halloween theme. It was just like horror, so I figured it would be for October. And this is the second book I've read by this author. I read their debut, The Return, which I also really loved, and now after loving that one and then really loving this one, I want to go back and read the books that came out in between. I think one of them is called Cackle. But yeah, just so good, so much fun. DM me when you read it so we could freak out about it. That is Black Sheep by Rachel Harrison. Coming in at number 7 is a book I've already covered on this podcast, Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead. I will give you a little quick overview of it now, but I really recommend going back to episode 1. I think it is the first book I talked about on Professional Book Girl, which is very exciting. Ashley is one of my favorite authors. You may have noticed by now that 2 of her books made it into my top 15. And they're of 2 different genres. She writes insane thrillers and really fun romance books. Like, I'm just so impressed by her every time I read one of her books. Midnight is the Darkest Hour is one of her latest. This is a Southern Gothic horror religious trauma ode to Twilight extravaganza. That is how I've just been explaining it. I think it sums it all up perfectly. It is dishy, it's fun, keeps you guessing, like literally guessing so much, even after the final chapter, guessing. I freaked out about the ending. I couldn't put it down. It is so good. When you're done listening to this, go to episode 1 and you can hear me talk all about it. And I know that's like kind of I said you were getting 5 books in these episodes, and like technically it's only 4, but I mean, that's just the way that the cookie crumbles, I guess. And my top 15 books of 2023. Finally, the final book of this episode, number 6, The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This is an unpopular opinion, but honestly, I think everyone's Riley Sager ranking is an unpopular opinion. This book is my favorite Riley Sager. I have such a tumultuous up and down love-hate relationship with Riley Sager, and honestly, I think most of it comes from the fact that I feel like I was like conned by him. I was hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, because the first one I read was The Last Time I Lied, which was my favorite until I read this one. And then I read Final Girls, loved both of them, was obsessed. This was back when I was just starting to get into reading. I had just gotten Book of the Month. I had Book of the Month before I started Bookstagram. So I was like, I got them from there and I was just like so obsessed with them. And they're really great starter thrillers. They're great. His books are great thrillers at any time, but specifically if you're starting to get back into reading, I always recommend Sager. I thought they were written by a woman. And then I used to work right by the Barnes & Noble in Union Square, and I was walking by one day when Lock Every Door was coming out, and there was a banner up because they were doing a signing, and it was a picture of a man. And I remember walking into my office that day just like gobsmacked. Like, what the fuck? Riley Sager is a man. And I don't really read books by men. It used to not be on purpose. Now it kind of is. I just find that I enjoy books written by women so much more. There's more emotional depth. The characters feel more real. Not to say that like men are bad writers, but like, I don't know, I think women just do it better. And specifically when the main character is a girl and a man is writing it, usually there are things that annoy me. And like, I'm not going to elaborate on that further. I feel like most of you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, like, you'll start picking up on it now that I've planted that idea in your head. And not knowing, I never would have guessed when I read those first two books that Sager was a man, but then knowing that he was, when we get into later books like The House Across the Lake, I loved that book, but the way that that character's relationship with alcohol just like really, really bothered me. Um, and yeah, so since I found that out, I've always had a bit of a love hate. I just like, I don't know. I think everyone's favorites vary so much, which is a good thing, I guess. Like they're all great books. I've enjoyed all of them, but he just like does things in all of them that like annoy me a little bit. But, like I always keep coming back to him. And he is like the only male author that I actively look forward to his books. So we just like have a complicated relationship, you know? But this one is my favorite of his. And I think part of why I loved it so much, I read this right after I went to MetLife shows of Taylor Swift The Eras Tour. I went to the first two shows and I lost my voice in a way I never have before. And then I was so, so sick, like the sickest I had been in, outside of having COVID twice in years, after the Eras tour. And I read this kind of like high on cold meds in this like fever dream haze. And so much about this book kind of lends itself to that. And I'm not saying like you need to be on like a shit ton of cold meds when you read this to enjoy it, because I know people who weren't and loved and read it. But I think I was able to lean so much into kind of the more ridiculous aspects of it. I was able to suspend reality because my brain just wasn't functioning properly. But I loved it so much. And I think a huge part of why I loved it so much is that it is kind of part historical fiction. So this book is based off of Lizzie Borden, which is kind of one of the most famous true crime cases. If you're not familiar, the legend goes that she murdered her whole family with an axe, but they were not able to find her guilty. So she was like living in the town she lived in free forever, and people would make up like famous nursery rhymes about her. So a nursery rhyme plays a part in this book. Sager had a book signing in New York City that I went to, and this came out because I loved this so much. I wanted to hear him talk about it. And he says like the idea came to him because of the Lizzie Borden nursery rhyme. So that plays a big role in this book. And the nursery rhyme is about Lenora Hope, who I will talk about in a second. But there are two timelines in this book, 1983 and 1929. The 80s timeline, you're kind of able to forget it's the 80s in some instances. Like you notice it when you're like, oh my God, just like send a text, but like she can't. It's the 1929 timeline and really all of the 20s that you start feeling this historical fiction aspect to it. You don't have to love historical fiction like me to love this book, but if you do love historical fiction, it's kind of an added fun layer. So in 1983, our main girl is Kit, and she takes a job as a home care nurse for Lenora Hope at the infamous Hope's End Mansion. And back in the day, I pictured it as a Gilded Age mansion, but it was built post Gilded Age. It was built in the 20s, but just think of like that type of splendor and money and like this super rich family on this house on a hill above the rest of the small town, like looking down on everybody. And the house now though is like falling apart. It's slanted. Like she becomes a live-in carer for Lenora Hope, who I'll talk about in a second. And like she's like, during the night she like ends up at the bottom of her bed because like the floor is slanted, and like the house is a character in itself. And it's basically like it's built on top of this cliff, and it's like literally slowly like sliding down the cliff, and eventually it'll end up in the water because of like erosion and that science shit. So no one wants this job. Like there's a nursery rhyme about Lenora Hope because it is rumored that in 1929 she murdered her entire family, and they were never able to prove it though. So that's why she is free, and she is now basically like completely incapacitated. She can't speak. She can only move one arm. She is completely bedridden. Like, but she needs full-time care because of that. And no one wants this job, but Kit is not getting any other jobs, and you learn why. So she is basically forced to take this job, and there is a huge mystery in Kit's past that you end up obviously finding out, and it starts to play a role in the rest of the book. And so, like I said, Lenora is completely bedridden. She can't take care of herself. And at first, Kit's afraid of her because she grew up in this town where she is a legend. She is like the town's folklore. There's a nursery rhyme everyone knows about her. And it's like everyone would be scared of her. Like she is a killer. But she goes and it's like this frail old lady in this bed who can't speak, can't move, can't do anything for herself. And slowly but surely, Lenora and Kit form a friendship. And Lenora, like I said, can only use one arm. So Kit, like, I don't remember who instigated this, but basically, Lenora starts telling Kit her story by like typing with her one arm on a typewriter. And Kit will like save the pages. And this is when she is doing that. This is when we're transported back to the 1920s and we learn Lenora's story growing up in this house with her parents. We learn about her family, her dad's like business dealings. I love those chapters. Like, that could have been its own book. I thought that was so great. And then the way that Lenora's story unraveling plays into the 1983 timeline was just so much fun. Things in this book were so clever and so well done. I have to shout out my friend Sam, who I shouted out in the first episode. He is Monsieur Marple on Bookstagram. He guessed this one little detail that when he told me he guessed that, my jaw was on the floor because I never saw that little reveal coming. But it is full of so many twists and turns. And like some of them are some things like that small that I freaked out because it's like, oh, obviously, but like you would never even think to second guess into that. The end of the book, I've never been as like, I keep coming back to the word gobsmacked in this episode, but I was gobsmacked, like jaw on the floor, could not believe it. Just so clever, so well done. There is a full host of characters in this, all the people that work in the house. The house itself is a character. Just so, so good. I really love this so much. That is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. And that is our show. Thank you for listening. Like always, please make sure you are following, subscribe, whatever you have to do on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. Follow me on Instagram at Kara Watt. Follow the show on Instagram at Professional Book Girl. Check out my bookshop.org. I think those are all the announcements. And I will see you next week for the final episode of my top 15 books of 2023. I want to know what you guys think is number one. So comment on the episode Instagram post or DM me or email me or something and let me know what you think the number one book of 2023 is going to be. I can't wait to get into the top 5 next week. See you then.